All right, today's challenge is something that everyone says is bad about building web apps with Flutter. Now, I would agree in some ways that building a traditional website, like a company marketing page or a blog or something like that, yeah, Flutter's not the best choice. There's plenty of things out there that just work right away, are good for SEO, are good for reading and copying and pasting. Whereas Flutter, I think, is great for something like, let's say, building like a Spotify web app. So it's great. But maybe there is a case for Flutter to work better on the more traditional web. So what we're going to be doing today is looking into how can we actually, with the dynamic, single page application, which Flutter ultimately deploys as the website, how can we add things for SEO? How can we add things for things like Open Graph? Ways that if you post something to Slack or Facebook, it pulls the proper metadata. Because the app ultimately is JavaScript, when a search engine or a web bot, crawler, whatever you want to call it, comes to your website, it and you're at maybe a particular URL, like a blog post or something like that, there's no way for the search engine it's not running JavaScript, it's essentially scraping your view source of the website to look for certain things. And because all this is dynamically interpreted on the fly based on your JavaScript, you're not going to be able to pull those things. But what I have built here using the Pokémon API, just because it's great, is a way that we could do that. So let's pull up, this is just a list of all 150 Pokemon, or 151 from the original. And I'll go to like the Squirtle page and we'll see a couple things here. For instance, we do have a URL that changes based on that, which is super helpful for web. And if I was, now this is hosted on the internet. It is hosted on a Firebase website, web hosting. So Facebook and whatnot will be able to access it. Now I can copy this URL and go into the sharing debugger of Facebook. You could also post to iMessage, Slack, WhatsApp, all these kinds of things. And we'll actually see once we run the debugger. And we'll just give it a minute. We will see that, look, it's pulled Squirtle, the name, Pokemon number 10, and the photo itself. So how is this happening? How is Facebook able to dig into this? Well, I'll tell you one secret is it's not it by itself. It's not running Flutter or even compiling the JavaScript, or interpreting the JavaScript and figuring out, okay, what does this page mean? We did some work here to make that happen. So let's see what we can do here. Yeah, I think this tutorial is much needed right now because a lot of people are kind of I don't think this is a common thing that's being solved. I actually on Reddit, someone was asking about this, and this might have been a couple months ago now. And I, rather than trying to be like, well, you could do this and do this, I spent a little bit of time, building what we're seeing right here to prove that, yeah, it is possible, and to kind of look at some good practices. So we're going to build this right now. I hope you enjoy. Obviously, we are just using Pokemon as kind of a fun twist on this, but this would work with anything. If you're building a blog, if even a company information site. Again, I don't know if building something that could be done in React or Gatsby, for instance, where it kind of already has the server-side rendering. I still think that's the better way to go for something like a company website, 100%. But I think more and more as Flutter grows, it's good to have these kind of practices in place. So let's get right into it then. Oh, right. So all I've done is just done the basic, create Flutter app sort of thing. So there's nothing, I haven't done any secret things under the hood. I am on the latest version of Flutter at the moment of this recording. If you've seen my videos before, usually the first thing I do is erase a bunch of things from the default main.dart because we're going to make that ourselves. And let's just make our home page just for now, so it actually builds a scaffold with an app bar with app bar. We'll give it a title of, we'll just see test for now. Okay, I'm getting that const does not need to be there. Title, text. I'm out of my element right now. Okay, And let's run this. I am going to build this to web. We might as well work in web. And we will go to the run button after changing it to Chrome. Now, one annoying thing about working on web is it does launch its own kind of instance of Chrome. And you'll see, and I'll probably do this a bunch of times, where I'll go to the wrong Chrome browser. And because it's a different instance, I can't even do my command tilde to switch between them. But so you'll see in here, actually I have two Chromes now. This is my normal, I'm browsing Chrome, and this is what we've built right now. So I'm going to minimize this one for now, just so it doesn't get in the way. Okay. So we have our wonderful starting test app. It is beautiful. I hope you love it. Okay, we're going to start with getting some dependencies in here. And there's only a couple that we really need. And there's really only, this is the practice that I've, kind of R&D'd that works. So we're just going to add a couple dependencies here for us. The first one is we are going to add provider. Just so we can kind of access state and stuff like that. I believe that is a good package that you may or may not be familiar with. So we will do Flutter pub add provider. We're also going to add a package called do. This is kind of like a alternate from using HTTP, and there's pros for it. I am happy to use either, and you've seen me use HTTP a lot, and I think in the Lord of the Rings one, I think I use do there. So you can, if you have one that you prefer, there's not too much of a difference here. We're also going to put something in called Flutter Modular, and I like this package especially for web apps because it just allows you to do kind of like routing and stuff, and a lot of other things, but we're going to be using it for the routing. So that you can kind of have a nice way to have name dynamic routes, because for instance, our URLs will be something like /Pokemon / their ID or something like that. We want that to be dynamic, and then we're also going to add something. This will come in handy later, called URL strategy. URLs in Flutter by default use a hash bang. Essentially, you have the main primary domain, and then it's like a hash, and then I think even an exclamation mark, and then a slash, and then you get it, but it's not super clean. So this package will eventually allow us to make our pathing more traditional, which is going to be really important when we are trying to do some server-side rendering. Okay, so that's kind of all we need, I think. We're off to the races here. In our main.dart, we're going to start by going into our main, and I'm going to add this, which is something you should kind of do, I think in any app. Widgets Flutter binding ensure initialized. Just call this function. Just make sure everything's ready to go before things run. And then in our run app, instead of running our app directly, we are going to use this thing called modular app. So modular app. And that's coming in from that package modular that we just installed. And we're going to have to create something called app module, which I will just kind of put here. It's going to tell us we have no idea what that means. But then our child is going to be a multi-provider, because we want to pass in eventually multiple providers. And let's use a provider, change notifier provider. And in our create, we will just create something called, we're going to have something called API service, and that's going to be what actually we interact with, which is fun. And then the child of this whole thing, if I can figure out where this would go down, I think it would be right here. Yeah, child, that's where we're going to have my app. So let's see if this will actually, okay, it cleaned it up a bit. Obviously, we're having some complaints here because it has no idea what any of these things are. But let's make these real quick. So we'll start with the app module. So let's actually, we're going to do this right in our main.dart. So I'm going to make a class down here, app module, and it's going to extend something called module. This is built into that module, Flutter module package. So module has a couple things we want to override. First of all, we are going to override something called binds, and it returns a list of bindings, and it's actually just a getter. And we are going to right now just make it an empty list. We can we'll talk about this a bit more later. The other thing we want to override is what's called routes. This is the important part. Override and it's going to return a list of modular routes. And it's also a getter, so we'll put that. So we're just overriding these things that if you were to look in here, you would see what they have. They have imports, binds, routes, and then this thing called copy, which we won't worry about. And this is going to return a list of routes. So what we want to do is create the different routes of our website. And these should be child routes. And the first name, we're just going to do a slash. This will get replaced when we actually make the screens because we want to use a constant that kind of connects these together. And it's going to have a child. And the child has two parameters, which we don't actually care about. So we'll use an underscore for the first one and a second one here. And here we're going to have our list screen, which let's make that right now. Because this is a simple app, I'm not even going to worry about having subfolders or anything like that. Let's just make something called list screen.dart, and we'll just make it a stateless widget, list screen. We'll import stuff, and just for now, we will make just a very empty scaffold. It's telling me this thing because it wants a const. Let's just give it an app bar called app bar, and give it a title with text of Pokemon. Sure, and we can get really fancy here and actually do it properly. Okay, so we have our list screen, which means here we can actually say list screen. Now, what I'm also going to do is on this route, we're going to add a const static called route name, and it's going to be equal to just /. I think I have this backwards, static const. This is a nice practice to do when you are using routes, so you can kind of control what the route would be. This is just the main screen, so it would be /, but for instance, if we're doing the detail screen, it might be something like Pokemon/1 or something like that, right? And that means over here, rather than hard coding just this string, we can actually say list screen.route name. So this is just a nice practice. That way, when if we wanted to change what the routing was, we just go here and we change it, and everywhere that is expecting it will reference this, and we'll be good. Okay, I'm also just gonna make this a const here. So we'll save that. We're also having a, am I missing a closing thing? Oh, it just needs a slash at the, or that at the end. Okay, the other route that we're going to want to need, and this is really the reason, you could do this without using this modular route, modular package, but we're also gonna have another child route. And it's going to, and let's actually make this screen now. I'll actually speed up things and copy this. We'll make a new file called detail screen. I am moving pretty fast just because this part isn't really like the super important and doesn't have so much to do with what we're talking about here in this tutorial. So our detail screen, we're just going to have I'm just going to use /detail. We could make it /Pokemon, we could make it /P, we could do whatever we want, but this is the detail screen. That's its route name, and I want to make sure I renamed everything. Yep, we're good. So we'll save that. And then here we can do the same thing, detail screen, we need to import it, .route name, and its child similarly is going to have these different things. Now the first thing we don't care about, but the second thing is actually the args. And we do, in this case, care about this. So, and let me remember what these are. Yeah, this is context, as usual. So context, but we don't care about the context. So I'm doing this underscore thing. It's just a good practice when you don't really need access to it. Might as well just kind of make it an underscore. But the args are very important here because we want to be able to pass these args. And by args, it's kind of like the URL parameter. So, the URL might be like, detail /1 or 2. We want to have access to what this dynamic variable will be. So we will do the detail screen, and in the detail screen we're actually going to pass in something called ID, and that's going to be something where we pass in that args.params ID, and what I'm going to do is make sure it's a string, just so everything doesn't complain. Now ID isn't known yet, and that's because we need to actually create it, so we're going to make a final. I am going to make it an int, final int ID. And in here, let's do required this .id. So anytime we want to access the screen, we know an ID has to be passed in. And here we will see, okay, ID is no longer complaining, but this is going to complain because it's saying that it's not, it's a string. So we're just going to do an int.parse around that. And we'll add just a thing there. And that looks pretty good to me. So this is our routing essentially. If the route on our page is just a slash, we will see that it will load the list screen. However, if we see a path, oh, I did miss one thing here. So we're using this route name right here, and I'm actually going to go and pass in sort of like a parameter here. So this is a common thing in a lot of web application software where you can pass a parameter like this. So this isn't like looking for detail / literally : ID. It's looking for detail and then sort of like a placeholder of ID. So we got that. This is, I don't know why it's mad at us. Oh, there's still we haven't made our API service yet. That's why it's mad. So let's just quickly make something called API service.dart. And I'm literally just going to make a class called API service. It's not going to do anything, meaning that we can actually see what we've done. So let's go API service, import. And I think I just maybe made a small mistake here. Change notifier providers. It's just not imported. That could be why. Create. What is it telling us? Oh, provide. No. API service.com. Oh, yes, we do need to. Okay, API service, and it needs to go with change notifier. And then we should see, yes, everything's good. We can const this. We can add a couple little commas here. And now if it's performing a hot restart, we are still seeing these errors, but I imagine sometimes the hot restart gets stuck, especially in web. I don't usually like developing in the web environment. Even if I know that the output needs to be web, I like to just use Mac OS. However, if you know you have to build to web and you just want to dev in Mac, make sure that you're testing pretty often in web, because maybe a package that works in Mac isn't actually working the way you want. This sometimes happens with web, and I'm just going to click stop. One good thing about web is it's a lot faster to build than, especially than iOS, and faster than Mac. One downside is the hot reload is not as good. Usually it just kind of refreshes your whole site. So we will wait for a moment. Okay, awesome. So, we did miss one very important thing. We want to make sure that, because right now where is it? Our My App is just putting the scaffold in right here. What we actually want to do is we're going to get rid of home entirely. We don't need it. We really just need we don't even really need a title, but we have it. Sure. I'm also going to rename this to OG Flutter, because that's what's used in web, at least for your title here. And let's do, okay, so we have that. We do need what's called an initial route, and we're going to use the list screen route name. And then what we can actually do around this whole material app is just called .modular. And that's because we essentially have everything wrapped in this modular app. And this now just handles, instead of putting, normally you would kind of have like routes here, and you would have them, or it's actually a map, and you would label all them. But because we're using the modular package, we don't need to do that. We just kind of tell it what the initial route is, and then this takes over your routing. And similarly, it looks like we're kind of stuck again. Could be because it was just like a pretty big change. Could be because I'm, the web dev isn't the best. I'll say the one thing I do like about developing a web, and sometimes I do go to it, is the network inspector uses Chrome's network inspector. I find that the built-in one, at least in VS Code, which if we go to the network, you can open the dev's network page, and you get like this sort of stuff. It's actually telling me because I'm building for web, it's not available for this application. But this network inspector, although it's useful at times, it's kind of buggy, and you can't even copy and paste from it. It's kind of terrible. Whereas here you get access to all the sweet stuff that you're used to as a web developer. Okay, so now we'll see we have Pokemon. So this is actually coming and hitting the list screen as opposed to what we had before. And in theory, if we did /detail and then a number, we would see, okay, it's still the same, but let's just make sure. That's because we so call it here. I'm just going to rename this to detail. And there you go. So if we go, /detail, it doesn't matter what we put here as long. Now we will get an error if we put a string because it's going to try and parse this, format exception, cool, whatever. That's something we can fix in a bit. And then sometimes with web, weird shit like that happens. So let's just go detail /4 or something, and we'll see, okay, run the detail. So it knows and everything's good. Okay, so we're off to something here. We have the modular set up. We've cleaned up the main. Let's create our API service really quick. And I'll try not to waste too much time on this. Again, this tutorial is not specifically about working with an API or anything like that. But should we take away some extra learning, I will be happy. So what I want to do is we're going to create some constants, like even outside of this. This could be put in a totally different file, but API base URL. And we're using something called the Poké API. And it's pokeapi.co/API/v2. That's kind of like our base URL. And I'm going to also make another thing called limit, and it's just going to equal to 100, just when we're making a call. So we have that. Another thing I want to make is just a model that represents this. So if we go to this API right here, and let's actually go to their docs, just so we can see what we're really doing. Oh, everything is slow right now. All right, we won't go to the docs just yet. Hopefully their service isn't down, because that's going to make this very difficult. I mean, I don't think it is, because it was working over here. I could just be having a slight internet issue. Okay, let's just make some stuff. So the Poké API, when at least you call a list endpoint, like get me all the Pokemon, it returns stuff in sort of like this paginated response. It's not just like a list of things. It has different things in it. So we're going to just create that so we can work with it really nicely. Again, this isn't, unless you're specifically trying to make, this Pokemon API, this might, this isn't the most relevant part about this, this tutorial. But essentially there's a list of results that come back. There is a string that represents next, and that's kind of like the URL to get the next page. There's also a string called previous, and that's the same thing as next, but backwards. And then there's also, it gives you a count. So we're going to create the constructor for this, and we are going to require this dot results. Actually, we don't necessarily have to require it because we can just set it by default to an empty list, and that will conform and everyone's happy. This dot next, this dot previous, and this dot count, and let's also just default it to 0. And we need that. And anytime you're setting defaults of like a map or a list, you just need to put a const there. Okay, there we go. So that is kind of like our paginated response. Also, when we do call this API, and maybe we'll just kind of get that part out of the way now. There are a few things. So again, mostly because this isn't really about working with DO, or working with APIs, I am going to just kind of copy and paste some stuff over, just so that I'm not spending time writing a bunch of stuff. I will walk you through it, and we'll clean some stuff up because there's some things that are a little bit out of date here. But let's start with the actual API service. So it's using change notifier, and it's also, I like to also include the diagnosticable tree mixin. It just helps for debugging. I also need to import DO here. So this is kind of like our get request thing. And if you've seen any of my other tutorials, see, the web one's annoying, right? you'll see that that usually I like to do this is kind of just make a very like simple thing for generically calling get. So this takes the API URL and whatever path we pass in and whatever parameters we pass in and creates a response similar to what we do with HTTP. The main difference in DO, or I mean, there's probably lots of differences, but one thing is you can actually pass parameters in as a query parameters in as a key, and it'll handle all that messiness of doing the whole like question mark something, this equals 1 and this equals 2 and that kind of thing. So we just have our get, and this is a feature, and it calls DO. DO is our library that's making the HTTP request, and it ultimately just returns response.data. And this application, we don't need posts. We're not working with an API that you can actually mutate. We're just working with retrieving data. So we have a list endpoint as well, and this essentially gets this now. I'm going to do this. So when we want to do list, we pass in a page in our UI or wherever we're doing it, defaulting to 1. And these are the parameters that the API is expecting, what page we want, what the offset is, and I'm basically then taking whatever page we're on, subtracting 1 and multiplying it by limit, and then passing in limit. Cool. And then we're calling basically, it's going to then call whatever our base URL is with Pokemon at the end, and then whatever parameters we have. We get those results back, and we go and we made this thing called list result, or I made it, and I'll explain it now. Basically, a list result of Pokemon. Now, there's more things I think we can get access to, but all we really care about is the name and the URL of where it lives. So we construct that, and then we return a paginated response. There's also a detail one. This one's even simpler. It essentially calls Pokemon / the ID and then gets the data back. So we have a pretty simple API service to work with the Pokemon API. And I am annoyed right now by this this building for web issue. I'm not sure what the problem is, but it seems like, okay, it is working. Yay, it's working. Okay, so we have our API service. Very good. What is next? Okay, I think what we should do, I guess we can make some UI now. So let's go to our list screen right here. And this shouldn't be, this should be pretty simple. So the list screen, we're going to convert it right away to a stateful, we're going to convert it to a stateful widget. We'll refactor, convert to stateful widget, and then we have this lovely thing here. So in our state, before our build function, we're going to keep track of a couple things. One is going to be a list of that list result that we made, and then we're going to call it items, and we're just going to initialize it as an empty array here. So that's cool. And the other thing is, let's just keep track of whether or not we're still loading, which is a good practice, so that we can show a spinner. We will be loading by default at the start. Let's go to our init state. We're going to override that. And because I want to do some asynchronous stuff in here, in my initialization, I can't actually, you can't override init state and just make it async, because it, I mean, at least from what I've learned, is you shouldn't do this, because you're kind of like changing, this would actually no longer be a void, it'd be a future void. So I'm just going to do, the init state's going to happen, and we're going to call our own function called init. So let's make that future void init, and it will be async. Okay, in here we are going to essentially call that API service. So we are using provider for this, just to kind of access things. We could just kind of like instantiate an instance of this thing without using provider, but I decided not to do that. So we're just going to make something called response, and it's going to be equal to await, and we're going to do provider dot of API service. And we want to pass in the context. We also want to say listen false, because we don't want we don't want this thing to always be like reloading and waiting for something to happen. And what we really want to do on that is call that list function that we made. And so it'll await, and then once that's done, we're going to set state, and we're just going to set loading equal to false. It's no longer loading, and we're going to set those items we made equal to response dot results. There we are. Okay, in our build function, we already have our app bar, cool. Now in our body of our scaffold, first of all, let's just check, is loading? If so, let's just do a center and give it a child of circular progress indicator, like that. And we can const that. And then if it is not loading, that's when we'll do this other stuff. And we'll use a list view builder here. It's, you know, the obvious thing to use. So list view.builder. And in here, we want to, first of all, have a count. So item count, and that will be equal to items.length. And then our actual item builder, which takes the context, which we actually don't need access to. So we'll do sort of this, but we do want access to the next parameter, which is index. And in here, we are going to essentially return something that that will display that Pokemon in the list view. So first of all, let's just make an item is going to be equal to items index. And then we will return something that we're going to make right now. Let's make it. It'll be called item card.dart. Our item card will be pretty basic. It will be a stateless widget. Item card. I'll import the things we need. Let's make it a card. It's going to be a card. We also want to make sure that when we create an item card, we're passing in something, and we're going to use that list result. Result. I'm kind of purposely, not like we could have called this Pokemon list result or something, but aside from like where we have to have the word Pokemon for working with the API and some stuff, I'm just trying to make this also like as generic as possible. And we're going to make this dot result the first thing you pass in, like that. And in our card, what are we going to have? Let's put I like to use a list tile for a lot of things. List tile is just a nice way to have kind of like a title, a subtitle, maybe a leading and a trailing action button, that kind of stuff. So title is going to be equal to a text of result.name. And we'll give it a trailing of an icon. And it will be icons.chevron chevron right. That gives that little arrow effect. And then on tap, we will come back to this after, but we'll put it in there. We can const this, and we can save, and we can go back here, and we actually want to return that now. So we want to return item card, and we need to pass in the item itself, which we've created here. And if we save, and hopefully this hot restart works. Hey, it did. Nothing seemed to have happened. Let's just do a reload. Okay, so we're getting some spinning here. Did I mess up my? Yep, is loading false? Did we call on it? We called on it. Okay, so something is going on. And we can look at our network inspector. I am going to, there's a lot of things. I'm going to go to my fetch thing and see, here's Pokemon page. I think what might be happening is the Pokemon API is down right now, which is odd. So this is the response we're actually making. Or again, I could be having an internet problem right now because we don't know. I'm going to pause for a minute and we'll look into what could be going on. I have some great news. The Pokemon API is not down. I learned that I had a typo in here. It's not .com, it's just .co. Hopefully that will resolve any problems that we're having. And we will see. Okay, look at that. Look at that. So essentially, we just as a quick review here, in our list screen, in a init state, we are calling this function, which goes and calls our API service, which calls the Pokemon API, and then we set the state to loading false, and the items to whatever those results are. And then in our list view builder here, we are looping through them all, and that's what the item count is doing. How many should I loop through? And we're creating an item based on that index, and then we're creating an item card, which has this this title, this whatever thing. Let's look at the response just for fun of what really comes back here, just so you can kind of see. Now this is kind of tiny. I think I can zoom it. So the list response is actually, with their API and probably for performance purposes, it is very basic. We are really just getting a name and a URL back. That is fine for our purposes, which is why we can't really show their picture in here. We would have to make subsequent API calls or kind of like, you know, if we were really trying to do this performance-wise, we'd probably want to kind of pre-compile that stuff into our app, like make something called, you know, ivysore.jpg, venusaur.jpg, so that, you know, we're not making that many API calls, just get a picture. But we don't care. I'm cool with just showing it just like this. Okay, so that's very good. We are calling our thing. There is no pagination, and I think they have a limit. We could try. Let's just see. We made our limit 100. Let's make it 151. They might have a hard limit on it, but let's see if we get to mu or not. Oh, yeah, we get right to mu, so we're good. 151. Okay, so 151 is perfect. Actually, I'm curious. Do they have does this API? I'm sure it does. Probably has more. Yeah, we get into Chikorda or whatever, but we don't care about those Pokemon, do we? One of my favorite things about Pokemon Go when it came out is that they only, you know, even though there was like at least 600 Pokemon at that time, they started with just the 151, and it just made me feel good. Now there's so many. Okay, so we have our list view. Let's do our detail screen. And then, you know, then for the rest of this tutorial, it's really like, okay, how do we, you know, the purpose of this, how do we actually do the SEO / like open graph sort of thing. So in our detail screen, which I have right here, our detail screen is really useless right now, but it's about to be good. Okay, so we're going to, we're going to also convert this to a stateful widget because we need to do some stuff here. In here, we are going to have an init state. Init state, we're going to override it. I don't like, sometimes I get the, maybe it's when, no, it's just random. Like sometimes it gives you the IntelliSense for it. See, like sometimes it doesn't. Init, like I don't understand. So we'll do our super.init state, and then we're going to do that same pattern we did before where we init this screen. So we'll make a future void, we'll call it init, and it's async, so that we can use our await stuff. And we're going to make an item. That's going to be equal to await provider.of API service and context listen false. Oh, we didn't import this. That's why we're having troubles here. And we should be able to go detail, so the other endpoint we made, and we need to pass in something called ID. And remember, we have that here. Now, because this is a stateful widget, we can't just say ID, we have to say widget.id. So the widget referring to its parent here that we're extending. So we got our item, and similarly, we need something here to, and we'll just make this, we don't have a model to represent this really. We could, and we should if we're doing this really properly, but we're just going to make it a map of, I think it's going to always be a string as the key, dynamic, and we'll make it nullable item, and right here we'll do our set state, and we'll do item equals item. It is telling me, oh, dynamic, okay, we'll do this. Again, we could make a model that really represents the Pokemon and have a lot more, you know, fun with it, but just trying to make this good. Okay, in our build function now, we'll just handle this in a simple, yeah, so I want to, because we don't know, technically we don't really, you know what? Let's actually do this. I'm going to make a string called name. Or let's just call it title, because we do have access to the title. And basically in our item card, which is where we, we haven't done that yet anyways, but I know we will eventually have a title, string title, and let's just set it to, title, no, that's fine. And what we're going to use here is widget.title as the name. Okay, it can't be a const anymore, obviously. Okay, so what we want to do, we have our title, and then in our body, let's do that same thing. So if load, we don't have something to track loading, but we can, we could, but we could also just, because this item is null at first, we could just go if item equals null. This is just a way to get around having another variable. We can use that same sort of thing, center, child, circular, progress indicator. This part can all be constant, but otherwise, this is where we will, have our fun. And let's do a column. And inside our column, we will have some children. Our children is just going to be an image.network, and we will use a variable that we will make now. Our image is essentially, now this is something you could, it'd be easy to figure out. I happen to already have looked at the API response and the documentations. So what we're going to do is final, actually, no, we'll do it, we will do it right here. So we're going to use item, which is this guy here, item. And we want to pass in, now this is just how their sort of convention works. And again, we could have made this like a whole model and being able to access it a little bit nicer. But if we actually go into a key called sprites and then other and then official artwork, if you're confused right now and you're like, where is he getting this? It's because I've already built this thing and I've looked at their docs and I've made it work. But this is just basically, you can think of this as this is a map, right? So you would go item.sprites.other.officialartworks.front default is just the convention to get their sort of like default one. Now we do have this error here, and that's because item is technically can be null, but we know it's not null, or because if it's null, we're not even going to render this, right? So we just have to put an exclamation mark here and it should be good. So that's our image. Now we do want to give it sort of a width and a height. So width, let's just do double.infinity. We'll take up as much room as we can. And let's give it a height of 300. And for fit, let's do box fit contain, so we always see it. And then is anti-alias false? And that's just because these are kind of like pixel art graphics, and I don't want, when it resize, I don't want it to look all like blurry and trying to make it look better. Like I want it to have that sort of pixel art look. Okay, so that's part of our column. The second thing in our column, let's just put in its number, its Pokemon number, and that can be found in item. Literally just using, there's something called order. We missed a trailing comma here. And there we go. Let's just add in this guy, make it a little bit cleaner. And we're almost there. So now we need to connect. We have no way to get to this screen other than trying to type in something. Actually, I did realize something. Because this is a web application, it is entirely possible that someone could get to this page without us passing through, a specific number or ID or anything like that. The ID will be there because that's in the path. But the name, which I said like, oh, we can use this, we can't actually assume that we'll have access to that. We will when we push to it, or we could if we push to it. But if someone just hit the URL, which we want this to support. So no longer can we do this. The one way around this, we can go, actually the cleanest, or at least the easiest way to do this is, let's just do this. If item is equal to null, let's still return a scaffold just so it kind of like is cool and everything, and we can put the spinning bar and everything, but its body is just going to be a center child circular progress indicator. We can make this whole thing a constant. So this will kind of be like, okay, we don't have an item yet. We're just going to kind of return this empty scaffold with just a spinner. Meaning by this point, we already know item will not be null if it gets here. So we can get rid of this whole thing here. And then we know we have access to stuff. So for name, for instance, we can use item name. And we need to put this because we know it's not null. So that'll make the title, and then the other stuff is all good, and we're fine. So now we are getting the name specifically from the API response, as opposed to before where I was like, oh yeah, we could totally just pass the title through. But that will break when people hit this path just on their own. Okay, now to tie these things together. So let's go to our item card where we kind of stubbed in this right here. And this is where kind of the magic happens. We have, because we're using this modular package, we can actually go modular dot, and let's import that. Modular dot to dot push named, and here we want to take that detail screen dot route name. And I realized one other thing. Actually, this is fine. What I'm going to do, I'm going to make just a variable called path. final path, and it's going to be equal to detail screen.route name. And what we want to do is actually replace wherever we had that string of /id or colon ID, and we're actually going to replace in result.id. But we actually don't have access to that ID, or do we? Or do we? We do have ID. Let's remember why. List result. If we go to see our list result, name and URL, why is, oh, right. Because I didn't really write this all out, so I forgot. I made a parameter, a getter called ID on the list result. And what it's doing is it's taking, so if we looked at the response, for instance, of this, just to make this really clear, because we're only getting back the name and URL, there's no thing for ID, but we know the ID is whatever this last thing is. So basically what we're doing is we're taking whatever the URL is, splitting on this, and we're taking the second last piece of it. Because there'll be a piece after here and there'll be a piece here. So this is just a way it basically parses the URL and gets back an integer. So then we actually, luckily in our item card, can pass that in. Int can't be assigned to string. So we just have to convert this int back to a string, Okay, semicolon, and then we pass in path. So this is essentially going to make something where, remember what the route name was. It was detail/ID. I'm basically going, okay, I want to replace that with whatever the real ID is, and then go to that route. So let's reload fully. And this hot restart is killing me right now, but there we go. Okay, now this may or may not work. Let's see. Let's click Bulbasaur. And it looks like an error maybe happened. Let's go to our console. Click Bulbasaur. Okay, apparently on tap is not doing anything. Let's just print something here. Tap. This could have something to do with the hot reload. Who knows? It's going to look really tiny for a minute. Oh, it is working, kind of. Okay, expected value of type string, but got one of type int. I wonder where that happened. Hopefully this will tell us a little bit more. Main.dart47. Okay. It's something to do with this args.id toString. Okay, it could be something to do with this. Let's print out our path and see what it actually is. And I sometimes just like to do this so we know we're looking at the right place. And let's reload. Oh, okay. Let's just go from the start. So there's some logical error here, but we should be able to get to the bottom of it if we look at what happened here, assuming detail/5. So we are going there. We're pushing to the path. So that's totally fine. Okay, so it probably has something, in fact, I'm quite sure it has something to do with our detail screen, because notice how even without the passing of doing that modular thing, we get this error here. So let's kind of walk through this. So we have a final int of ID, maybe because it's supposed to be a string. That could be the case. This ID. Okay, I'm gonna look at our routes. It might have something to do with our routing right here. args.paramsID.toString, and we parse the whole thing and we pass in an ID. Interesting. Okay, turns out it was the silliest thing. I was passing a integer into this text. It used to be like this. and you can't pass an integer into text. You have to convert it to a string. So we could just go .toString as another way of doing this. I played with a bunch of things and found out that was the issue. Yay! So we should be good now once this restarts. There we go. Okay, so now if we click, for instance, Venusaur, there we go. There's Venusaur, and we have his number 3. Obviously, this could be a lot prettier, but you get the idea. We are making it work. And the cool thing is, not that I've tested this, but if we just hit the detail hard, so we never clicked a button, that was a fresh restart, it knew based on the ID to call that API endpoint, make the name look good, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's pretty sweet. We can look at War Turtle, we can do whatever. So this is all good. This is kind of like our foundation to actually add, make the SEO part work. So yeah, in the next part of this video, we're going to be digging into how can we do a little bit of essentially server-side rendering to make this work. Now, I'm saying server-side rendering. It's not exactly that. We're not actually going to be running the Flutter app server-side. We're just going to be kind of building something that can interpret the URL. One more thing I do want to do just to, before we get into that thing though, is notice the path. It's using a hash character here. First of all, this isn't, super, it's not super nice. It doesn't feel like a normal URL. So if I was just to erase this, what's going to happen? Well, nothing's going to work. It just ends up reloading because it's like, I don't know what to do with that. So how can we solve that? We installed a package earlier called URL strategy, and it's actually really easy to do this. So after we've ensured initialize, we can actually go something called set path URL strategy, just like that. And if we click on this, we'll see it's just some, I don't even know how it works, but as long as we call that from that package, and we probably need a hard reload for this, so let's do it. And let's just see. And I'm going to get rid of the this guy here. And we can click on Venusaur, and you'll see actually now the URL is cleaner. So this is going to set us up, first of all, with, I think just in general, this looks a lot cleaner, minus that there's this crazy port here, which obviously when we deploy will not be the case. But yeah, so in the next part, we're going to look into setting this up live on Firebase web hosting, and this will work within the free tier, no problem. So as long as you have a Google account, you'll be able to follow along. And then we'll be looking at how, without us doing any work, how does this page get interpreted by, something like Facebook or any Open Graph bot. And then secondly, okay, how can we actually make this happen so that it pulls the stuff all nice for us? We'll see you in a bit.